because everybody, this is Dan Newman, one of my favorite people in the world, somebody who has been doing this work for a few decades and is involved in many complex systemic initiatives as we speak. And some of them, I think you said you'd been involved with the grid in Italy for 20 years. Is that right?
17 years.
10? So we're going to hear from Dan a little bit about Afterlife and how you keep things moving and how he does his debriefs to kind of get the sense of where things are going. So over to you, Dan.
Okay. I think there were different angles on Afterlife, and the one you were talking about was a very interesting one, which is not so much about us as about the client's afterlife. And I think that I was eavesdropping a bit, and you've mentioned about some touch points and trying to build in touch points afterwards. And I think, one thing that I found because of COVID is how we are much less focused on the event as a freestanding thing, and that we have a much longer ramp up. And this is now true of in-person events. And we're doing in-person events. We had a 130-person 2-day event last week. I've got a 35 in-person event next week. That what we've learned, one of the many, many, many things we've learned from COVID is this ramping up to before an event involving everybody, not just sponsors, we tend to use a landing page online, but then also a long tail afterwards. And it's something we've spoken about for 20 years and never did. And now we're forced to, and we're not going to stop even as we get back into in-person work. And this long tail, I think, changes the discussion on Afterlife. Because it used to be, you've got some agreement on next steps. Are they going to do it? And how can we lower the risk of abandonment, or, as someone wrote in the chat, plan that sits on a shelf? And I think we have tools that we used before and will continue to use. Like, we tend to try and often succeed in keeping the sponsor process alive, where the sponsor process is a special thing where we tend to do it at the client and not at we have a facilitation space here, but we tend to do the sponsor process with the client. And it's always a bit awkward because we want to bring in our rules, but it's their joint. And so we have to bring in stuff that they think we're insane, like music or boxes or things. And to keep that sponsor spirit alive, you need some of the rituals around it as well, which, again, if you're doing it in a space of ours, we own the environment, it doesn't feel weird. At the client side, it's weird, but it's useful. Now that we are breaking out of the Scan Focus Act, we're still doing Scan Focus Act, but often it looks different, where if it's online, it's basically focus. We don't really, I assume you guys have figured out more of this than I have. We have not really figured out how to do Scan and Act online. And so we're doing it offline. And we're doing it in a totally different way. And we're getting really great results, where we'll do a lot of the scan before an event happens through self-directed work, we often ask people, hold up their phone and shoot a little video, and then they comment on it, and we put it on a platform, and they comment on each other's videos, and often about things that they don't even know why we asked. They'll be sort of metaphorical things. So we'll have this long scan beforehand that might take days or weeks. And then afterwards, but then we leave from an online event, we leave without genuine act, because I don't know how to do a synthesis conversation online personally. Maybe you guys have figured this out. I haven't. We try, we fail. And as such, when they do agree to do things, it's superficial. Without having some sort of synthesis, the agreement isn't really worth much. And so we take on a lot more responsibility than we used to in making that commitment real. And that often means having to rethink stuff offline and actually dirty our hands as if we were consultants, and take some of the outputs of an online event, which again for us is focus, and we'll make sample deliverables and say, is this what you meant? Who's going to do this? And actually create something that's beyond the plan and actually is their deliverable. And we'll get it wrong 2/3 of the time, and that doesn't matter because they have to react to it anyway. Anyway, so that's in an online world where we're getting much more involved in the act, and that creates the opportunity to stretch it out over time. As we move back to in-person events, and again, that's happening really quickly, where there's a risk of going back to the just old scan focus act, see you sort of model. We keep people online and we throw stuff at them. We ask them to share their subsequent work on the platform. We comment on it, even though we don't understand anything. We comment on it to keep that discussion alive, keep some of the spirit alive. They'll go right back to their silos once we're done. And we need to keep reminding them. You know what? I'm sure that Jody and Svenja have talked about this idea of creating strong memories. And the memories we create are incredibly strong and durable. And I run into clients years or decades after an event, and they remember everything much more than I do. And that memory that we leave is such an asset for them. It's nice for us, it's flattering, but for them, it's this asset because it gives you a hook on which to build that afterlife. And I haven't yet figured out how to make those strong memories online. I know I have colleagues who say that they figured it out. But now that we're going back to in-person, I think that afterlife is less problematic. Then that's the angle you were talking about. Then there's other angles that were in some of the questions that Jody and Svenja sent that were more like commercial. How do you sell the next event? I don't know. Is that something you want me to talk about?
Well, I think to Sarah's point, as long as there's a relevant place or it was all in place for you to not just promote yourself, but that you really believe the project needs your help to go to the next level. Absolutely.
Yeah, saying it's a commercial issue is misleading because it is in that you need to actually sell something, the next piece of work, if you're going to do the next piece of work. But how do you know if they need it? And also, how do you know to shut up if they don't need it? And sometimes the best way to enhance the afterlife is just to step back and get out of the way. I think often we're really successful in creating that kind of energy and direction. And getting back in their face might, in some instances, slow them down. Jody and I, the very first client that Jody and I worked on together, this is a long time ago, after a while, they came to us and they said, look, we have Dan fatigue. And, I'm waiting for the day my wife says that, but but it's a legitimate thing. We take up a lot of space in people's heads and in their lives for a short period of time, but we take up a lot of space. And sometimes that afterlife is about getting out of their way, but very quietly giving them tools or shooting questions at them. Jenny says, how exactly do you keep the online engagement up after the session? And again, we use a platform, and I can show you if you like, I can share my screen, but we use a platform that gets integrated into the event. We're learning now how to do that with in-person events. We have learned it over the past year and a half for virtual events. But the platform does depersonalize it in a good way, I think, because it's not about me selling us. It's keeping the dialogue alive and reminding people of what they said. Often there'll be fantastic ideas in the scan that never make it to the act. And 90% of that leakage is a good thing. But 10% is stuff that, it's a shame. It's worth trying to keep it alive and shooting it out. Who was it that said, the thing like with postcards, we do that. And it's great because I don't know what's the thing that should have been kept alive. So I ask them, what is it that we're going to forget in 6 months? Write it on a postcard, write your address on it, and then we mail it out after 6 months. And we should follow up more and find out if they do those, but we at least keep it in their face. And that's, I think it's a service we're doing for them without measuring the impact, which is a shame. The only measurement tool we have, the only indicator is, do they call us back? And, luckily they tend to. And so you measure it in a commercial level, but it's actually what's the footprint, the fingerprints you left behind. This client that Jody mentions, we've been working with the Italian National Grid. Italy had a big blackout in September 2003. And we've been working with them since this blackout to prevent the next one. And what happens is you learn a lot even about the technical stuff. I actually have learned a bit about how the electric grid works. And the danger in that situation is that we start to think of ourselves as consultants and tell them what to do. And so I need to keep hitting myself and saying, Dan, you don't know a damn thing. Remember that. You shouldn't know anything. Next week, I've got a gig with a brand new client about which I know nothing. And it's the particle accelerator in Geneva, CERN. So it's about high energy physics. There's something I don't know anything about. And so this is such an opportunity to be ignorant, which is the best position to be in when you're a facilitator. And then, Jody and Svenja asked me to think about afterlife. And I think, the biggest challenge of afterlife is that you think that you're not ignorant anymore. You think you've learned something. At this event last week with the National Grid after 17 years, one of the participants who had not been in earlier events said, wow, Dan, it's almost as if you understood something. And, that's sort of cuts both ways. Because it's better if I don't understand something, because then the questions we ask are sincere. It's really out of curiosity, and I want to share that curiosity with them. Jody?
Dan, I wonder if you could maybe drill down on some of these long-term clients and engagements, especially the real complex ones, and kind of how you've managed the debrief, say, of one part of it, and how important the debrief is in your mind in general, and maybe just how you close things, because we know that closings are absolutely maybe the most important part of anything, and then how you use that to move to the next point. And maybe you could be more specific on a client.
By closing, you mean closing an event or closing a project?
Yeah, either an event which is a part of a project, or a part of a much bigger systemic issue that you are working on, and you know that you need to pivot to somewhere else to keep it going.
So I think that with these long-term relationships, and 17 years is a long time, we are disruptive. We take up a lot of space, and we are intentionally disruptive. And there's no organization that can be constantly disrupted. They need also to get on with it. And we have to get out of their way. And so I think that we in these cases are very intentional with that, where we look at their transformation cycles. And they tend to, with this client, their transformation cycles tend to be 18 to 24 months. Something big comes along and rocks their world. They've got to rethink everything. But then, and that'll be 18 months, and we'll have a lot of work over those 18 months. And each event, the outcome of one event creates the need for the next one. And with this client, we've not been very good at tying them together in an intentional way. They get tied together by default, which means that they call us basically, and we don't do the sort of follow-up we should, but they call anyway. But that's over, 18 to 24 month window. And, to be specific, so what do? We treat each event, even in a cycle like that, as if it's brand new. So each time I spend a lot of time doing interviews before an event. If I show you my calendar, it's freaky because I've got a bunch of events going on, and I'm looking at it right now. Just today, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 client interviews today. Tomorrow, I've got 1, 2, 3. I've got 2 on Saturday. And these are half of them are for this project that I know nothing about, this particle accelerator. But the other half are for this client another client that I've been working with for a very long time. And I just have to treat it like it's new. And I have to drum up that curiosity. For me, it's one of the fundamental differences between training and facilitating. That a trainer asks a question only if they already know the answer, like a lawyer. And a facilitator only asks a question if they don't know the answer. It's because we're curious. And we embody the curiosity of the whole participant group. And so for me, the afterlife is about staying curious. And because it's not really the afterlife, it's the run up to the next one, right? Which happens to coincide with the afterlife of the previous one, but it's actually the run up to the next one. And it's about starting from scratch. I know nothing. Yes, I've been working with you for 17 years, so I can, I know your acronyms, but basically I know nothing. And each time I have to remind myself, Dan, you know nothing. And so it's about starting from scratch, which is a lot of effort. That plays out in different ways. So for instance, the particle accelerator, the woman, I got the call last week, the event is next week, so very little prep time. And she is a client from another organization. She left that organization, was just hired by CERN, and needs a friendly face to accompany her. I rarely sell work to people who have been in their job for more than 2 or 3 years, because they have to put themselves in play. Now, after 17 years, how does that play out? People change jobs in the organization. My main client at the National Grid, he actually left for 10 years and took us, and we went and worked with him in other companies. Then he came back. And so, I guess it's, we need to become virgins again every time. And, I like to think that that my curiosity is not a show. I'm genuinely curious, even about things I don't understand, like electricity transmission or high energy physics. But I'm really curious, and I'm genuinely curious, and I want to transmit that curiosity to them, because I've got good reason to be curious, because in fact, I do know nothing. But if they're going to do the work, they need to acquire the same curiosity, because otherwise they think they know the answer, and they don't either. They're just bringing their baggage. And so much of our job is creating that not creating, but sharing that curiosity that they need. It's an asset for them, because otherwise they think they know the answer, in which case this is all a waste of time. It's just redundant. Anyway, Jody, I'm not answering your question. I'm not being specific. I'm going back to first principles.
Let's just, maybe there's some questions as well from folks, and we can back into it. One of my questions was about work products and how you use them to kind of bridge, as Amanda had said, between possible engagements and to help them use it. But
you were talking about that before.
First.
I was interested in that. And then there's this question about what I ask in interviews. So work products. When we do a work product, and Mark is right in the next room working on one right now for this company, even though we've done this a million times with them, we always sit down and ask, okay, who is this for? And what are they going to do with it? And who is it for? Well, is it for the people who were there or the people who weren't there? Is one question. And if it's people who were there, we tend to use the first person. We did this, we did that. If it's for people who weren't there, we tend to do it in passive language. This happened, that happened. Then what are they going to do with it? Now, what we tend to find is that it's a souvenir that is of low value, or it's a very high value for a very brief period of time. And it's only of value for us because it reminds us next time we're in touch with them what we did, because we forget. So we put a lot of effort into the work products, and I suspect that much of it is wasted. But I don't know an alternative. And you're all from different organizations, and I suspect that some of you have really solved this. We put a lot of effort.
Now that you are also, you said you moved your work product more into ACT and helping them actually. Yeah. How about that type of a work? That has to have some value for them in some ways, either cognitive dissonance wise or actually as a roadmap.
Yeah. So, and we haven't yet figured out how to bring that back into in-person events. But on the virtual events where we're taking the ACT on our own shoulders, I saw Stephanie was there. Hi, Stephanie. We did this with the forum last year, where we did a series of sessions, and we had to draw the conclusions, which is insane. Who are we? But we would draw conclusions. And at the beginning of each session, we would say, here's what we took away from the last session. Here's the work that you did and what we think it means. It's like, who are we to even say that? But it got the conversation going, and they ended up taking our work basically, and they took credit for it, which was the idea. I mean, it's not like we're looking to be thanked for this. It's just to start the conversation. So what did we do? We went through their work and looked for, I don't know if Jody and Svenja, you talked about escaping to a higher order. You have not. Okay, I think it's such a fundamental concept for facilitation. But you have looked at the vantage points model, I'm pretty sure. So basically, if you remember the vantage points model, philosophy, culture, policy, strategy, tactics, logistics, tasks, it's about, as a facilitator, being at a different vantage point than your participants at any moment in time, and looking for a perspective that new vantage point gives. Now, that's even more important in the afterlife, because they will fall right back into task, almost always, maybe logistics and tasks. And we are so well placed to keep pestering them with questions at the policy, strategy, or tactics level. And occasionally, I mean, I wouldn't do it frequently, culture or philosophy, because you can't rethink your culture every couple of weeks. But policy and strategy, I'll go there a lot. And so I will shoot observations at those vantage points based on their work, which were at lower vantage points. If I shoot comments at the same vantage point where they are, I'm just another participant, but more ignorant than all the others. I add no value if I'm at the same vantage point. If that afterlife I approach from a higher vantage point, maybe occasionally a lower one, but I can't picture that. But from a higher vantage point, I'm keeping them in a systems thinking perspective. I'm keeping the system alive, because the system always wants to collapse into the action. And I'm contributing to keeping it alive as a system. And I think it's about the best gift we can give. It's not the best gift they can receive. I mean, there's others, but not from us. It's the best gift they could get from us, is keeping that systems view alive. And I do think that when we take on that act, that's exactly what we do. It's a different act than what they do. Theirs is all task. I couldn't do the task stuff. I can't make their action plan. A question is what I ask for interviews. So sometimes when I'm working with consultants, they say, oh, send us your interview guide and we'll do it for you. And I say, sorry, it's the dialogue. It's not the question. I don't care what the answers are. I just want to get them to talk. And so like these interviews I've been doing today, this is for a strategy for this particle accelerator. And, you know, they have 18,000 scientists crawling around this thing. It's quite remarkable. It's also frightening because my company is, and also Jody and Svenja's, we're called Matter, and they have antimatter, and they could annihilate us. But the question, I only got to one question in each of these interviews, and then they just talk and talk. And the question is, so what would you like to get out of this strategy? That's it. And then they just talk. And I just listen, and I take pages and pages of notes. And, you know, this is just today's interviews, and I can't read them either. And it's, you know, I want them, at first I want to hear how they say things. Second, I want them to feel listened to before I show up, or they're going to be disruptive. Some of it's just behavioral. If they feel I listened to them beforehand, and I really do, they'll be much more kind with me. I do not record the interviews. I don't have any reason for not recording them. Well, I would never listen to them, so why would I record them? And
we had a chance to hear from Rob about last week about his one-on-ones with sponsors as well.
How does he do it?
Well, he was talking about the political side of it. People help me, was political, and what were the other two?
Rational, emotional.
Political, rational, and emotional that he's listening to in those interviews.
And I don't think I'm intentional about that, but I think I probably am doing that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the other thing about those interviews that is so helpful is that you are creating an ally before you even ever walk in the room and when you leave the room. And I think
so important.
Yeah.
It just improves the energy at the beginning. It's not the first time I'm seeing all these people. I can remember maybe their face and say, even before they have a badge, oh, Eric, great. It helps the energy, but it's, for me, it's really substantive too. And I don't know that I I probably would be better at it if I were more explicit about the political, emotional, and rational. What I tend to look for is not so much what they say, it's the patterns between the way that different people describe the same thing, and which I tend to map to vantage points in my head. And not just in my head, I mean here too. And I will, here I've written project life cycle, arrow, policy, star. I'm mapping that to policy, and it's helping me think that that is at a level above their strategy that they're going to need to work on. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, a question. Hi, Dan. I know we're talking about afterlife, but while you're going through the process of the interviews and remembering what Rob said last week, do you also ask very straight questions about hidden agendas? If they have one? And
I can't imagine that I would get an honest answer. I mean, I think that we identify hidden agendas a lot. And I don't think it's because we ever ask. It's that, if you get out of the way and let them talk, people, they'll just incriminate themselves. They'll tell you everything if there's enough time. And people are so happy to be listened to that they'll tell you. And to me, it's a hidden, an agenda is only hidden if they don't say it, right? Otherwise, it's the agenda. So yeah, I guess I would have trouble asking a question like that because it almost says like, I know you're a sneaky guy, so tell me your secret.
I wouldn't say it that straight, but
how would you ask it?
You know in which environment I work, so sometimes as there are a lot of politics, you want to understand what is the hidden agenda.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we find this all the time, and I have a lot here on hidden agendas. I mean, amazing stuff just from today. And the hidden agenda is the gap between what one person wants and what the institution wants. And you discover what the institution wants, first, because some of it's documented, and second, because, when you hear the same thing described the same way many times, that's what the institution wants. If somebody either directly or indirectly shows that their priorities are misaligned, that might be the definition of a hidden agenda. So I do think that we tease it out, but I would not know how to ask that in a straightforward way. And I do try to be as transparent as possible. And when I hear things that sound like hidden agendas, I might feed it back and say, well, that's interesting because it doesn't really add up to what I've heard from the others. Is this in conflict, or have I just not heard that yet? So I might flag it myself. I would never, in a sneaky way, sort of a hive, unpack the hidden agenda.
Hey, Dan, you are in the middle of some pretty complicated stuff. Besides the grid, I know I'll let folks know that you work also with UNICEF and you work with the Global Alliance on Vaccine and Immunizations, and of course the CERN. So you're dealing with some complex systems, and we are the Systems Leaders Academy. That's kind of our focus. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your role as a system leader and trying to stay up at that level and trying to move the pieces around to address a systemic issue or opportunity. And if you ever really identify any of your sponsors or allies and help elicit them as a system leader to do some of that work. And so maybe you could just talk a little bit about that element.
Yeah, there's two separate questions there, and I think they're both interesting ones. The first one is, to what extent are we consciously or intentionally facilitating systems rather than just groups of people? And I think that, and I mentioned this, I think to Sarah or Anne, about, there's this one of, there's many systems models out there, and I like Donella Meadows very much, but there's another one, which is this Welsh guy, Dave Snowden, who's got a company called Cognitive Edge, and he's got a model called Cynefin. And he makes this very important, I'm sorry?
Cynefin.
Sorry,
Oh, I don't speak
Cynefin.
Welsh. Sorry, Cynefin. My Welsh is
Cynefin.
weird. Cynefin.
With the K.
Okay. Anyway, so he makes this distinction between complicated and complex systems. And complicated systems are those in which cause and effect can be understood in a transparent way. There might be a long causal chain, and so you need an expert to unravel it, but there is a clear cause and effect chain. What a complex system is where cause and effect can only be understood in hindsight. And I think that that is our playing field. And so part of my systems antenna are looking for, is this truly a complex system? Because if it's not, I don't belong there. They don't need facilitation. They need consulting. They need an expert. So I'm one of my systems antenna is saying, is this a complex system? Are they clear about how cause and effect work in their system? Are they clear? Is it transparent how decisions are taken and then implemented and then acted on? Is it transparent how investments are prioritized and then implemented and then maybe generate or don't generate some tangible or intangible return? If it's all ducks in a row, I'm the wrong guy. Our system is the wrong system because we're optimized for complex systems, not for complicated systems or chaotic systems. And so that's really my first question. And that comes to me early on in the sponsor process, is how clear are they about cause and effect? Because it's not saying there is no cause and effect, it's just that they're only discernible in hindsight in a complex system. Now, then you asked a question about how we interact with other people on that. And I do see, especially with clients that we've had for a long time, that more and more of our role is a coaching role exactly on systems with our clients. So the National Grid, so I've known this guy for 17 years. He trusts me a lot. I think very highly of him. He is very political, somewhat emotional. I mean, when he tells me about how he manages, he's a horse rider, and he tells me how you dominate a horse. And that's how he tries to dominate his staff. Now, wow. I don't think he uses a crop or anything, but he's into like control and domination. And in a complex system, control at best is an illusion. And there is no real control in a complex system. There's influence. And so I do see some of my role as keeping the system's perspective in front of him as an individual. And a fair amount of my role is coaching him and saying, Francesco, take a step back and let's think about, not this particular decision, but how this model fits into the broader system that you're trying to influence. And what are the levers at your control? You don't, not control, because you don't have control. What are the levers at your disposal? And what are going to be the unintended consequences of pulling those levers? Yes, vantage point used with a sponsor. I don't know who wrote that. Jody wrote that. And that's the point, is this escape to a higher order. I never want to be at the same vantage point as my sponsor or my participants. If I am redundant. And vantage points is just one model, but it's a very good one. It's one of my faves because it is a reminder of how things look differently from a systems view, but then vantage points keeps you down to earth because it shows the necessary for coherence between philosophy and task, that they're not separate. They're just different sides of the same coin. Hidden agendas, also the difference between what the institution or person says it wants and how it acts. Yes, allocating resources, which is sort of what strategy is. When you see people allocating resources in ways that don't reflect what they say are their values or mission or strategy, that's interesting. And that's where, as facilitators, we're going to jump in because it's a misalignment that we can't align, but we can get them to talk about. And that creates, the topics they bring to us are never new, but it's our job to create a new conversation about old topics. And that's a great way to do it, is when you find, and we poke for it, even in interviews, I'll poke for those misalignments between the, stated priorities and evident priorities through resource allocation.
I want to jump just to maybe task for one of our last few questions. And if you have any other questions, throw it in there. But when you're working on a systemic issue and you've got a main sponsor and you realize that sponsor is the wrong sponsor, or the people on that old team are not fit for the next part. Can you talk a little bit if you've had that experience and how you work with them?
That's very tough. So for example, one client, again, a recurring client, we've worked with them for years and years, is a state-owned, it's the export credit agency. Every country has one. This is Italy's export credit agency. And actually, Stephanie shouldn't hear this, but I met the guy at Davos. Actually, he looked for me. And he said, oh, I was at the workspace and we need this. We really need this. And said, okay, I'll come visit. So I went to see him. He said, we really need this. We really need this. Go interview these people and then make a proposal. So I interviewed these people and I thought, maybe you need this, but not now. This is exactly the wrong time. You've just finally implemented your strategy. Wrong time. Sorry. So I told him, you don't need me. He never even thanked me. He just vanished. And then 2 years later, he says, you were right. Now it's time, though. So we did a bunch of work. He was very successful, got poached by somebody else. His replacement comes in, had the same name by coincidence, and was so clearly the wrong guy for the job. And it was just painful. And all those people thought of me as their ally and saying, you got to help us fix this guy. They had tried a coup that failed. I mean, it was really ugly. And I had no option but to be open with him. And I invited him to dinner one night and we went to Piazza Navona. He was staying at a hotel right near there. And I said, Alessandro, I don't think you've got the group behind you. And I think if we do this work, this is going to blow up in your face. And, I think that I didn't say, you're a third-rate boss, but I did say, I don't believe you have them with you. And that we're going to be putting you in a pressure chamber for 2 days. This is a 2-day event. We're going to be putting you in a pressure chamber. And I don't think that you will come out with your leadership intact. And I would recommend against doing this. And I put it, maybe not entirely honestly, I put it as about him. When it was about him, but it was also about everybody else. But I did it as I'm doing you a favor, Alessandro. Anyway, he insisted on doing it anyway. It did blow up. And I didn't push back, but I got blamed for that. And that was the end of our work with them. Now he's left and they've just recently called us again. But it was the end because I can say why I think it was because, he lost the trust of or he never gained the trust in the first place of his team. We cannot simulate collaboration. It's either real or we can't do it. And he wanted to simulate a tight management team in front of everybody else. Can't simulate it. It blew up. So that was the end of that, actually.
Okay. We've come to the end of your time, Dan. Thank you so much for
pleasure. Nice to see you all.
Sharing your views.
This is the end of this course. Okay, so I'll leave you. I know there are going to be tears and all sorts of things. So, but thank you for having me, and I hope our paths cross soon.